Good evening, everybody. Jó estét kívánok! Szeretném bemutatni Jay Millert, New Yorkból, storyteller. I would like to introduce you Jay Miller from New York, storyteller. We are very happy to have him here. És Margot is szeretném bemutatni, aki magyarországi mesélő, történetmesélő, aki felnőtteknek is mesél. And also Maya Mubarak will be here in this show tonight, and she's a Hungarian storyteller. So enjoy the show.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for spending this wonderful, beautiful day and evening with us. My friend Maya introduced me to this wonderful theater. 100 years ago, this year, my mother's father, my Zeta, he left Budapest to walk across the continent, get on a boat to New York. And my father was made in 1921 on Király utca and born in New York. So I'm back home. My Zeta was a storyteller, and he shared many of his personal tales of struggle, of survival, of fun, of happiness. And today I would like to share a few of those Zeta, which a young Jewish boy calls his grandfather, my Zeta. To begin, let's take you back to where he comes from. Máramaros Sziget, a little shtetl in the area which is now northwestern Romania, but in 1896, when he was born, that was the Hungarian Empire. It's a story about a man named Jacob Krantz, but he gained his fame as the preacher of Dubno. He traveled far and wide on a coach pulled by 2 strong horses and a coachman. And one day, while traveling between 2 villages, he was taking in the scenery, the birds flying in the air, the smell of the flowers of spring, the babbling brook on the side of the road, when he noticed that his coachman had a strange look on his face. They had traveled far and wide for many years, 10 years, and he knew the coachman very well, and this face, this expression, was new to him. He says, "My dear coachman, well, you look very pensive." "Well, my dear preacher, everywhere we go, all the towns and villages, they wait for you with such wonder and joy and smiles on their faces. And it's just wonderful. I would love to know how this feels." "Well, what do you have?" "Well, you know, maybe you and I can change clothes. I can dress as the preacher, and you could drive the horses and dress as the coachman." "Well, you know, my dear coachman, I trust you, I love you, I'm very close with you, but you know, clothes don't make a man. You know, it's inside of you what you need. What you need to say, what you need, they will ask you questions. What will you do? How will you answer?" "Well, my dear preacher, you know, in every town, in every village, every little hamlet, they ask the same stories and the same questions and the same parts of the Talmud to explain. And I've heard it so many times. I remember, I can do it." Well, the preacher was like you and I. He was an honest to, you know, to have a little fun, a little humor, a little joke with the people. And okay, let's do it. And they stopped the horses. They went behind the trees and they changed their clothes. And the preacher dressed as the coachman dressed as the preacher, and rode into the town. As they got into the town, they saw that the people had rolled out a red carpet into a beautiful hall. And the preacher, the coachman dressed as the preacher, in all his glory, the people smiling at him, Shalom Aleichem, preacher, Shalom Aleichem. They shook his hand, they hugged him, and he walked into a banquet. He sat at the head of the table, and he was all his glory, to know how it feels to be revered, to be loved. And at the end of the drinking and the eating, the wise men of the town put the book in front of him, said, "Dear preacher, for years we have been pondering, we have been arguing, and still we have not come to a conclusion. Can you please explain this part in the Talmud?" While sitting in the back against the wall was the real preacher. He wanted to see what was going to happen now. The preacher, the coachman dressed as the preacher, looks at the book. He couldn't even read. Sits up straight. He looks at all the people at the table. "I come all this way to your little village in the mountain, and you ask me for such a simple question, wise people like you? This is so easy. Even my coachman could answer it." And the coachman did explain this part in the Talmud. And to this day, word has it that the ancestors of these people from this shtetl 100 years ago, in those mountains in Transylvania, they don't speak about the wisdom of the preacher. They still speak about the wisdom of his coachman. In those days, far away, there lived a great king. He was king of the mountains. He was well respected and very powerful, but fair, which is unusual for a king. Now the king, with all his power, horses, castle, the finest food, the king needed a queen. So he put out the word. Hey, they had no internet in those days. He put out the word. Single king needs a woman. Bingo. He had many choices, but as it is for a king, he knew that he had to look into the eyes of the right woman. And when their eyes met, and they got that feeling, some of you in the audience, right? He fell in love together. The spark happened. And it was magnificent. And the king and queen, you know what king and queens do. And after 9 months, they had a beautiful little baby girl, a princess. And to make a long story short, because I know you probably have other things to do this evening, the king and queen had 3 baby girls. And the king loved the girls and cared for them and gave them everything they needed, but king likes to ride horses and shoot bows and arrows, in those days with a sword. And finally, the 4th child was a little prince. The trumpets came out again, and the king now had a partner. "Come on, prince." And he took him on the horses. He taught him how to ride, and the prince was good at it. And the prince could shoot the eye out of an eagle in fight on the back of a horse, like those old Hungarian horsemen. But the prince couldn't have one thing. It eluded him. He wanted to, every time he put his arrow in the bow and pulled it back and let it fly, he wanted to hit the bullseye. Don't we all? But the prince practiced. The king brought those Hungarian bowmen with those mustaches on the backs of those horses, and they taught him every trick they could learn. But Prince couldn't do it. They brought the Mongols with their long bows. He was good, but he couldn't hit the bullseye every time. You know how princes are. They want everything. They brought the Swiss bowmen with the whoosh. Apple's okay once in a while. But they couldn't hit the bullseye every time. So, when the prince became 18, they put together 3 wagons. Some soldiers, teachers, and some of the cousins of the prince. And they went on their journey to find the answer to this elusive question, how to hit the bullseye each time. They traveled far and wide, through hill and dale, through countryside, through farmland, and again, they came through a little village. And at the outskirts of the village, there was an old, dilapidated barn. It needed painting. The doors were hanging sideways, but on the side, there were 3 targets. And in the center of each target was an arrow. Stop, stop, said the prince. And they waited. To make a long story shorter, along came an old fellow. And the prince jumped down off the wagon and says, "Dear fellow, can you please bring me the person to teach me how do you hit the bullseye each time?" And the old fellow, recognizing that this was the son of the great and powerful and fair king, said, "Oh, sure, I will bring him straight away." And he headed back towards the little hamlet. And a few moments later, came a little boy, about 8, 9 years old. In my mind, hearing the story the first time, I see him as looking like Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, a little freckle-faced, curly-haired kid with his pants up to here, with no shoes, a little mud on his face. And the prince said, "You did this?" "Yeah. I'll show you." "If you show me," said the prince, "any wish you have will be done." Okay. So the boy takes his arrow to the other side of the barn. He says, "Well, you see, Prince, I put my arrow in my bow, and I pull it back with all my might, because I'm little, and let it fly. And I take another arrow, and I let it fly. And I take the 3rd arrow, and let it fly. And then I go into the barn. I take my paint. I take my brush. And I paint the target around the arrow. It's easy. If I had roses, I would put the roses here. Maya? Yes? No? No. When a woman says no, she means no. Please.
A folyó vízből ég, bánatot nem ég, hegyek, völgyek között, zengedezve járnék, ahol kitérülnék, virágot növelnék, hegyek, völgyek között, virágot növelnék, leányok leszednék, bokrétába kötnék, az ő édesiknek kalapjában tűznék. This happened a long, long time ago. The earth had already been created, as well as the mountains, the valleys, the rivers, and truth walked around the world. And she walked from country to country, from kingdom to kingdom, from town to village, from village to city. And wherever she went, she kept knocking on the door of every house, on poor people's huts, and golden gates of rich, beautiful palaces. But wherever she went, when people saw her, they turned away and they slammed the door in her face. Nobody wanted to make friends with her. Nobody wanted to see her. People didn't even want to know of her. And she just walked on, and her feet were tired, and her legs were tired, and her skin, it was grey, and it was dry like a prune, and her breasts were hanging down to her belly. And one day, she arrived at a small town, and in the middle of the town, there was a square, and in the middle of the square, she saw a strange figure. He was wearing all kinds of colorful clothes, all colors imaginable, blue and yellow and green and purple, orange. And people gathered around this figure. They were eager to look at him and listen to him. Everyone wanted to be close to him. They laughed with him and cried with him. And Truth watched this all afternoon until the sun went down and people started to walk home one by one. And then Truth went up to this figure slowly. And then asked him, "Who are you?" "Me? I'm Story." "Story? Tell me something." "I watched you all afternoon. Everybody gathered around you. Everyone wanted to be with you, to be close to you. People laughed with you and cried with you. They adored you. Why is that? And why is it that when I travel around the world, wherever I go, people don't want to see? They don't even want to know of me. They slam the door in my face. Why is that?" But it's an easy question to answer, said Story. Just look at yourself. People don't even want to know of you because you're naked. But I'll help you. Come. And Story started to dress Truth into his own clothes. Yellow and blue and green and purple. And when he finished, they took each other's hands and started to walk together. And ever since, they have been walking around in the world together to the great joy of all the people.
The grandmother, the maternal grandmother of my children, Margot, is from the same town that Maya is from in the eastern part of Hungary, Kisvárda. And I'll always love and remember Margot because she taught me how to diaper my first child, Josh. What's today? May 4th. In 5 days, he'll be 46. And I remember when he was a little kid, one of the revelations of a parent's life is diapering your baby, you know, and you got to watch out for his aim, you know, you got to keep it to the side. But I remember when he realized, excuse me, that he realized that his foot was part of his body. That image will never leave my mind. And the first day I met Margot, I was 16. Rita, the mother of my 3 children, she was 14. And we come into their flat in their apartment in the Bronx. I never heard the word flat. Flat was flat to me when I came to Hungary. We came into their apartment, and as you opened the door, there was the kitchen table right here. We have small apartments in New York City. And they were having a glass of tea. And somehow you hold the bottom and you hold the top because it's very hot and you drink it like this. And I was watching the Rogi and Sandra and Donnie and Margot drinking tea from a glass. And Barbara, Rita's older sister, was sitting there and she was very pregnant. Very pregnant. And I'm trying to be calm, and you know, this is my first time meeting the family. And Margot goes to Barbara. Barbara, you know them, right? Barbara, so what are you going to call it if it's a boy? David, Mama, David. Very nice, says Margot. David, I like it. It's a very nice name. And if it's a girl, Barbara, what are you going to call her? Wendy, Mama, Wendy. Wendy, Wendy, it's a very nice name, Wendy. No, Mama, Wendy. Wendy, I like it. She called her Debbie. So I was oriented to the Hungarian accent many, many years ago. Margot very often wore, I call it a babuchka. What is it called in Hungarian? Hold on, not everybody at the same time. 20 years I'm here, and still Hungarian is not one of my 5 languages. What is it called?
Kenda.
Kenda.
Yes.
Not Kenda?
It's a name.
Kenda. You know what Kenda is? I do. And this is a story about a woman who wore a shawl. And it's a true story. I read it about 20 years ago when I first arrived in Budapest, in the Budapest Sun. In those days, the Budapest Sun was actually a paper newspaper. You could buy it, get the ink on your fingers. It smelled like a newspaper. And every few weeks, a British writer, he was a war correspondent, would write an article, anecdote of something that had happened to him. And goes something like this. It was just at the time of 1989-90 when the Russians were leaving Hungary. And on the other side of the river, in the Buda side, somewhere beyond Buda Junji, was the Russian barracks, the fort, the encampment, and they were leaving. And the war correspondent, the journalist, his girlfriend was Hungarian and she spoke Russian, and he smelled a good story. He said, "Okay, dear, let's go to the fortress and you know, interview the commandant." And they go to the gates of this army encampment, and they ask the guard at the gate in Russian. The girlfriend translates. You know, I'm from the British newspaper, and I would like to make an interview with the commandant. Can you please call him? And calls on the phone. And, "No, go. Nobody's talking to you." But they see an old Russian woman with the. I can't get it. Kenda, okay. That's why I find Hungarian women are so sexy with that. Ha ha ha, I've been married to 3. Hey man, I'm from the Bronx. You laughing with me or you laughing at me? I know. I did that to a kid in Canada. He says, relax, mister, I'm laughing near you. Any Canadians in the audience? Oh, there you are. Come on, Janet. So the Hungarian girlfriend goes over to the Russian woman and says, dear woman, you know, what's your situation? And the woman explains that in 1956, as a Russian soldier, her son, her only child, came to Hungary, and in this madness of 1956, which I happened to watch on television living in New York City, her son got killed. And he's buried somewhere in eastern Hungary, maybe near Kisvárda, maybe near Békéscsaba, who knows. And the woman used all her money to travel from Russia to Hungary. She has nowhere to go. She has no money. Journalist smells a good story. They take her home to their flat in Budapest, in the 8th district near me. Give her a shower, have some nice dinner, walk around the neighborhood to look at the parks. And the next morning, after looking at a map, they used actually maps in those days, they went to find this cemetery in the eastern part of the country. And easily they found the village. They got directions to the edge of the village where the temető. And in the corner of the cemetery was the Russian soldiers' burial ground. And they go up and down the rows, which weren't too many, and they find the grave of her son. Tears roll down her eyes. She says her prayers. She moves her hands in the way that Russian Orthodox people do. She cries more. And along comes 3 teenage gypsy boys from the village who were playing under a tree on the other side of the cemetery. And they inquire, what are you doing? Why are you visiting this grave? No one has ever come here before. And the girlfriend, who speaks Russian and Hungarian, explains to the boys that this woman is visiting the grave of her son who died and paying her respects. And the boys go back to do their thing, and they're finished. The woman gets up from her knees, wipes off her cloak, fixes her Kenda, and they go back to the car. And then the dear woman gets in the back, the girlfriend in the front, the journalist drives, they're driving away, and in the rearview mirror, the journalist wants to get the feeling so he could write about it. Looking at the rearview mirror at the cemetery, and the woman is crying in the back seat, bawling hysterically. This will be the last time that anyone will pay their respects to my son's grave. But in the rearview mirror, the journalist that the gypsy boys have picked some wild flowers and put them onto the grave. And the journalist says, turn around, dear woman. I'm sure that your son's grave will be cared for from time to time. And she's just so heartfelt. They travel back to Budapest. They go back to their flat in the 8th district, have a nice dinner, another walk around the town. They walk down the Duna, breathe some fresh air in those days. It was a while ago. And in the morning, they go to Keleti station, where all of the Russian cars and tanks are being put on the trains to go back to Russia. What a wonderful day for Hungary. And the girlfriend asks to speak to the commandant of the Russians. And she explains that this woman has come to pay respects to her son who died in 1956, and she has no money, and she has no way of getting home. And the commandant, "Sergeant, take her to my car. We will take care of her." And the woman traveled in safety and in comfort back home to Russia. And that I read in the newspaper. They say for years that Hungary is the center of the world. Now, maybe the center of Europe, because I'm from New York. We say New York is the center of the world. But I've been here for 20 years, 21 years. And yes, I find it really wonderful to travel north, south from my home in Budapest. And I've spent some time traveling through Turkey. How many of you in the audience have been to Turkey? If you have, don't raise your hand. Okay, take my word for it. You better go now before more things happen there. Sooner the better. So I came upon, as some of my Hungarian friends know, the story of Nasruddin. How do you might say that in Hungarian? Nasruddin, or Nasruddin, we know in America. And this is a story of, of Nasruddin. Nasruddin lived at the edge of the Great Desert. And he lived alone, and he did his meditations, and he did his Sufi dancing, and he read his great books. And his neighbors loved him, but he really never got so neighborly with anyone. And one day, there's a knock at his door. He opens. His cousins have arrived. They all across the Great Desert to visit their cousin Nasruddin. They kiss, they hug. Nasruddin makes the tea, brings out the few pieces of bread and cheese that he has, and some hummus and some baklava. But now he has to cook a nice dinner. And if you know the Islamic people, when you come to visit, they never ask you, "Oh, are you hungry? Are you thirsty?" No, they will never ask you that. They just bring out the food and the drink. So Nasruddin realizes, "Oh, what shall I do? Because I live alone, I have a small flat." And he goes to his neighbor's house. "Dear neighbor, my cousins have come from across the desert, and I need to borrow your big pot, your family-sized pot, to cook dinner for them." "Oh, of course, good neighbor, here is my pot." And Nasruddin goes back, and he cooks, and he chops, and he makes, and he cooks a beautiful porridge, soup for them. Like I guess it would be Turkish goulash. Everyone is so happy and full, and they hug, they kiss, and they go back across the desert. A few days go by, and there's a knock on Nasruddin's door. "Oh, hello, dear neighbor," says the neighbor. "We would like the big pot back, because now we have to cook dinner for our family." "Oh, of course, says Nasruddin. "Here's your big pot." "But wait a minute, good neighbor." And he goes back into the kitchen. He says, "And here's a little pot." And the neighbor says, "But Nasruddin, we only gave you the big pot." "Yes, but the big pot had a baby." "Oh," says the neighbor, "yes, wonderful, thank you very much." And he goes back. And some time passes. You know how stories are. Time has to pass. And there's a knock on Nasruddin's door. Oh, his uncles and more cousins come from the other side of the desert. And, of course, he has to cook for them. He puts out the baklava and the hummus, and he goes back to his neighbor. "Neighbor, my family has come." "Oh, of course, borrow my pot, my big pot, take it, of course." And Nasruddin cooks and chops and bakes, and everybody is so full. Everyone is so happy. They drink, instead of palinka, what do they call it in Turkey? Not the yogurt drink, the Paulinka type drink. Rocky. Da-da-da. Not that Rocky. Everybody drinking some good Rocky, and the family goes back to their home across the desert. A few days later, knock on the door, it's the neighbor again. Nasruddin, my dear friend, may I have my big pot back? I'm sorry, I can't give it to you. What? Why can't you give me my big pot? The pot died. What? Said the neighbor, how can a pot die? If a pot can have a baby, the pot can die. At another time in his life, Nasruddin lived deep in the desert alone because he was safe. He could look either direction, all to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, and he just saw sand dunes. He felt safe. He was kind of scared to go into the big city where there was so much noise and walls and alleyways, and he felt good breathing that nice fresh air of the desert. But time would pass, he would run out of rations. He would have no coffee, no tea, no food, no chickpeas to make the hummus, no flour to make his pita. And he would have to make the trek into the big city. And one day, he did it. And as you might know, in olden times, the market was usually at the gates outside the city. And as he approached, he smelled the smell of the spices and of the food and of the teas and coffees brewing. But he was a little bit nervous to go into the city and enter. Meanwhile, the wise guys in the cafe. Now, a wise guy is much different than a wise woman. A wise woman is caring, empathetic, kind, gentle, compassionate. And the wise guy is not so nice. Could be nasty, could be bad, could be evil. And the wise guys in the cafe were watching. Who was this guy with the weird clothes, the funny red hat, and the slippers with pointy toes? And they watched him, and some time goes by when Nasruddin realizes he has to enter into the city. Now, one of the wise guys says, watch this. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to play a prank on him. And Nasruddin starts walking through the cities, through the streets, through the alleys, listens to the muezzin, and listens to the vibrations of the walls, and children running, and mothers screaming, and men yelling, and the smells got him. He would close his eyes every once and hold on to the wall. Oh, yoy, yoy. Now, the wise guy is following him, and minutes and hours go by, and Nasruddin is walking in and out of the maze of the great walled city. And finally, Nasruddin finds a place in a small alley off a main street, and he's tired, and he sits down on the floor and leans up against the wall. Oh no, says Nasruddin. I am sure that I will get lost. How will I know where I am? So he takes his gourd. Gourd, they used to put water in it, a dried squash with a plug on top. He takes the gourd, and he takes a long, long rope, and he ties the rope to his ankle. And he ties the other end of the rope to the gourd, and he puts it down in front of him. So now he knows where he is. He looks down his leg, to the rope, to the gourd. Aha! He feels comfortable now. And he's thinking and he's thinking. Meanwhile, the wise guy is watching. What is this guy doing with ropes and gourds? Nasruddin's not fallen asleep. But time goes by and Nasruddin falls asleep. The wise guy sees his chance. He creeps up to Nasruddin. He leans up against the wall, takes out his own rope, ties it to his ankle, and ties it to the gourd, tied to the rope, tied to Nasruddin's ankle. Now the wise guy has to stay awake when Nasruddin wakes up. But time goes by and Nasruddin is having wonderful dreams. His little house in the desert is filled with food, and the water is bubbling up out of the oasis. And the smells of the beautiful spices in the market. And he sleeps, and he sleeps, and he sleeps. And meanwhile, the wise guy, he falls asleep. Nasruddin wakes up. Where am I? He looks down his leg. He looks down the rope to the gourd. There's where I am. What? He sees another rope tied to the gourd. He follows the rope to the wise guy's ankle, and he sees the other man. And he jumps up, frightened, and he starts to kick and beat the other man. And the wise guy wakes up. He says, What? Stop. What are you doing? Why are you doing this to me? And Nasruddin says, if you are me, then who am I and where am I? Nasruddin. May I invite you? I'd like to do for you what is called cantomime. Cantar is to sing, and mime, so it's a song and a story. We'll play a guitaromime. In the summer of 1978, I embarked on a Great Odyssey. My children were 1 year old, 4, and 7, and I became a single father for the next 11 years. And at the same time, I started to study theater arts and go on a spiritual quest. And meditation was the center of that quest. And some of my trials and tribulations of attempting to meditate. I need your help. When I open the window, make the sounds of a city, okay? When I close it, quiet. Yes? No. Hmm?
I must say yes.
Well, this also happened very long time ago. Once there was a town. I don't know where it was. And you don't know where it was. But it had all the things a town should have. A synagogue. A study house. A house for the poor. Of course, a few hundred inhabitants. Probably had a few storytellers. Last but not least, it had a rabbi. His name was Rav Moshe, and he was a very old man. And he was a very, very wise man too. His wisdom was so great that people even from faraway towns and villages visited him, asking for his advice. And one day, a young rabbi arrived in this little town. He was eager to teach and make a mark in the world. And weeks went by, and months went by. And already this young man was teaching a few students. And even Rav Moshe. But this was not enough. He still felt he lived in the shadow of the old rabbi, who had lived there for many, many years. This isn't right, he thought to himself. All the students flock to learn from Rav Moshe. They drink in his word. And what about me? I have no followers at all. This should. I must show how much worse I am. And he started to think hard. How could he become more prominent than Rav Moshe himself? He had to think hard. And he was thinking every day, and after a while, every night. For his mind was so disturbed that he couldn't even sleep. But deep inside, he knew that the knowledge and the wisdom of Rav Moshe was far greater than his. So after many sleepless nights, he realized, well, to attract students is to discredit Rav Moshe when he's teaching. I must ask him a question to which he cannot know the answer. And in the middle of a dark night, a plan started to take form in his head. I know what to do. Tomorrow, I go to Rav Moshe, and I will be holding a dove, a little bird in my hand, behind my back. And I will ask the wise man, is this bird alive or dead? If he says it's dead, I will just let the bird fly free. But if he says that the bird is alive, I will break the bird's neck with my own fingers and present him the dead body. This is a good trick. This plan is foolproof. He cannot win. There is no way for him to answer this question. The morning came very quickly, and the young man went to a neighbour and bought a dove from him, and quickly headed towards the synagogue. He knew he would find Rav Moshe there, with all the students, explaining the Torah. And indeed, they were there, sitting under a fig tree. And he went up to them with the bird. He slowly sat down and was waiting for the right moment. And then he stood up. Oh, Rav Moshe, I have a question. You're such a wise man. Everybody knows you're a visitor. People come to you from faraway lands to ask for your advice. So I am certain that you will know the answer to this question. I'm holding a bird in my hand. So please, Rabbi, tell me, is it alive or is it dead? Rav Moshe looked up at him. He was calm. Only his eyes were a little bit sad. Well, my son, whether that bird in your hand is alive or dead, that's in to you. The young man stood there for a moment. Then he sat down at the foot of Rav Moshe. And he stayed there and became his follower.
Growing up in New York City, in America, we grow up with a book called The Giving Tree, and it's about a tree who loves a little boy, and it was written by a fellow named Shel Silverstein, and 1964 it was written, and still to this day it's still in hardcover, and you got to spend so much money to give it to your children. And years ago, there was a show. I had a girlfriend from Canada, and everything was very legal with her. She says, "Jay, this is intellectual property, and if you're going to perform this book, this story of the tree and the boy, you have to write to Shel Silverstein and get, the okay in writing." Okay, Amelia, okay. So I wrote. In those days, you had to take a pen, paper, write it, put it, fold it. Those who know what I'm talking about after the show tell me about. And put it in an envelope, put an address and a return address, and lick a stamp, put it on and lick the envelope, and you put it in the mailbox, and you wished it got there. Days, weeks would happen. So I sent a letter of asking, requesting for the use of this intellectual property. And in 3 days, bingo, I got a letter back. It said, "Desist, do not do it, don't start it. We will take your home, we will take your car, we will puncture the air out of your bicycle, we will take your firstborn child. Don't do it." Okay, I'm glad Amelia told me to ask. So, here goes. High in the hills, near a beautiful city, there lived a pond. And every day in the summer months, when it was oh so hot, the little boy would come. And he'd swim in the water and splash and play games. The boy loved the pond so very much, and the pond was happy. But the boy stayed away, and the pond was sad and lonely. "Boy, boy, come, swim in my water and splash, and let's play games." "Oh, I'm sorry," said the boy. "I'm a teenager now, and I need some cash. Can you give me some money? I need to buy things like the other kids have, huh?" I'm sorry, boy, but I have no money. But what I do have swimming in my water is fish. And if you catch them, you can buy the things you need. And the boy spent all of that day and half of the next catching the fish in the pond. He caught the biggest fish in those parts. He caught some middle-sized fish, and he caught some teeny-weeny fish. And he took them to the market, and he sold them for money and bought the things that teenagers need. And the boy loved the pond so very much. And the pond was happy. But the boy stayed away for a long while. And the pond, boy, come, swim in my water and splash and let's play games. Oh, I'm sorry, pond. I have a family now. I have a beautiful wife and 2 small children, but pond, my dear friend, we have no house. Can you give us a house to live in? I'm sorry, but the mountain and the forest is my home. But what I do have at the depths of my waters are precious stones. If you dive down and get them, you can trade them in the market and build your house. And the boy dove to the depths of the pond, and he took the precious stones inside the shells. He opened them up, and he brought them to the market. And he built a beautiful house for his family. Maybe a house like you or you live in. And the boy loved the pond so very much. And the pond was happy. But the winter came, and the pond froze from the cold and lack of love. But as you know, as you all know, the seasons do change. They come and go. And the thaw, and the sun, and the boy, come, swim in my water, and splash, and let's play games. Oh, I'm sorry, said the boy. I am retired now from my work, and I only want to travel and see the different peoples of the world. I want to travel to Turkey. I want to travel to Canada. I want to travel to New Zealand. It's a hot place now. I want to travel to Portugal. I want to go to Budapest. Can you help me to travel, please, pond? Oh, I forgot to tell everybody to shut the thing off. I'm sorry, said the pond. All I have left is my water. Why don't you take it? Don't shut it off. It was great water music. All I have left is my water. Why don't you sell it to the people of the city so they can use the water? And the boy took big pipes and tubes and sunk them to the depths of the pond and turned on the great faucet. And the water came up out of the pond into the pipes, under the road, through the valley, into the great city where the people showered. And the boy traveled. And the boy loved the pond. And the pond was happy. But the boy stayed away for many years. And after some time, the boy returned. Pond? Pond? My dear friend, please, pond, give me a sign. I have not the eyes of my youth to find you. Pond. Now you know from the tale that the pond, she loved the boy very much. And when you love someone very much, there's the time, the moment, when you have to speak the truth to them, no matter what clothes the truth wears. And the pond, she said to the boy, boy, when you came to me as a young child, you swam and you splashed and you played. As a teenager, you wanted things. I gave you my fish, and there are no more. When you were a young man and wanted to build a house for your dear family, I gave you my precious stones in the shells. There is not one left. When you retired and wanted to travel the earth, I gave you my water. And now, boy, I am nothing but a dried up mud puddle. And when the boy heard this, he began to cry. And the tears rolled down his cheeks and fell into the mud, drip, drip, drip. And he cried and he cried, and he saw that the water began to rise to his ankles. And he looked up at the sky, and the sun started to be closed by the clouds. Can everybody put their hands above their head and make two fists? This is the yoga part of the show. Take a nice deep breath through your nose, and it poured down upon the boy standing in the pond, and rose to his knees, to his waist. And just then, put your hands together and fingers together gently. Another deep breath through your nose, and the clouds open up, and the sun shone down upon the boy standing in the pond. And he looked down, and he saw his face, his reflection upon the pond. And after all these years, after a lifetime, the boy loved the pond so very much. And the pond was happy. Thank you so very much for sharing this wonderful evening. Maybe this is the first day of real spring in our beautiful city. Thank you very much, Maya, for sharing the stage with me. Thanks for bringing us here to RS9. It's a wonderful space. I love being up against the wall. Please tell your friends next Friday, a week from tomorrow night, I will be back here on May 12th, next Friday, at same time, 7:30, and I will be doing a series of Jewish stories called A Jewish Journey. A little reclam. In the back, we have the monthly schedule for all of the really wonderful things that happen at RS9. Have been here before. You know that this is one of their theaters, but right across the street, in the underground theater are some really great plays, and I'm here in the corner here of English stories. Please tell your friends, and if you'd like to, in the back, I have my CD that was made in Quebec and in Montreal and Toronto some years ago, and I'm selling audience members for $1,000 each. So I want to thank you very much. Tell your friends about RS9, and next Friday night at 7:30 here with some new stories. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now go home.